Washington. We will run the session as we usually do with our monthly sessions. We'll have a mini didactic for the first 15 minutes with a little bit of time for questions. And then after that, we will do some case discussions. We have 2 great cases that were submitted today. So we will be running through 2 cases, discussing with all of you and with our interprofessional panel. Our speaker today is a return echo speaker. Thank you for joining us again, Gina Tucker-Roghi. She is an occupational therapist, and she is based at Dominican University in California. She's the chair of occupational therapy there, and has done a lot of work in occupational therapy with older adults, specific work with folks with dementia. And today she's going to talk to us about the role of her profession of occupational therapy in general in age-friendly care for older adults. So thank you so much for joining us, and go ahead and get started.
Thanks. You guys hearing me okay? Yeah, great. Oops. Let's see if I can progress. Okay, I just want to mention that my work on this and my time in the training is supported by my Geriatric Academic Career Award from HRSA. So today I'd like us to look at the role of occupational therapy in providing age-friendly healthcare, and also understand the value of the occupational profile, which is part of our evaluation as occupational therapists, as a tool to identify what matters to older adults when receiving care within the healthcare environment and the healthcare context. I always like to start off with what occupational therapy is, because we are a somewhat broad profession with lots of different ways that we interact with folks. So occupations are activities that people need and want to do to occupy their time and bring meaning and purpose to life. So not just somebody's job or vocation. And occupational therapists help people across the lifespan to participate in meaningful occupations. And we often are called upon to intervene around self-care occupations, getting dressed, using the toilet, that kind of thing. But we also engage with helping people to participate in leisure occupations and social occupations, and also health management occupations. And so that's a bit of what we're going to talk about today. And we look for the overlap between the person, who they are as an individual, what they're capable of given their various conditions, and the environment. And in this case, we're speaking of the healthcare system sort of as the context in the environment, and then the occupation, which again, health management is an occupation that people engage in, but there may be other occupations that we're considering for an individual. But we're looking to find a match between that person, what they're capable of, what the environment supports, and the task or the occupation that they need to engage in. So in particular, when looking at productive aging, occupational therapy in particular, we're very hands-on and practical. We focus on what occupation looks like in real life. So an example I often share is, somebody who has congestive heart failure and is trying to manage that condition. We're often recommending that they take daily weights. And so the occupational therapist is probably going to be the one who thinks about, do they have enough balance to put their feet close together on a bathroom scale, and be able to stand there and take their weight, and then how do they record that, and do they remember how to report it? So all of that kind of hands-on practical doing of that health management activity is what we're part of. Occupational therapy is collaborative. We collaborate with families, particularly when we're working with folks with dementia, or when the caregiver is involved in managing a chronic condition, in order to create a workable plan for everyone involved. Often, if somebody does have a chronic condition, we're not focused on rehabilitating the person in that case, but rather adapting the occupation, the activity, or the environment to find that just right match and remove barriers to participation. It looks like I'm missing my last bullet there, but lastly, I just wanted to highlight that we are a holistic profession or perspective is holistic in terms of looking at the physical, the cognitive, and the psychosocial aspects of a person along with the environment. So in our evaluation, and if you were to look at the CPT code definition of an occupational therapy evaluation, it is to include an occupational profile and client history, assessments of occupational performance in the domains of physical skills, cognitive skills, and psychosocial skills, and then clinical decision-making, around that whole picture and how those three things are interacting, and then the development of a care plan. So I wanted to talk a little specifically about the occupational profile, because I think it's an untapped treasure that is probably available to you if somebody that you're working with, has had OT services. Now, not every OT uses this template, but essentially it's a required part of our evaluation. And so in some way or another, this should be reflected and recorded in the services and in the evaluation. So we're looking, at the reason the individual is seeking services, the occupations in which the client is successful, and the barriers that they're encountering to engagement in desired occupations that perhaps they're not engaging in. We look at their occupational history. So this is their life experience. We may be looking at their lifelong roles and interests as well, values that play into that. And then as we're looking at the context, the environment here, what is it in the environment that is supporting and inhibiting engagement? What are some of their personal factors that are either supporting or inhibiting engagement? And so here, those are listed as age, sexual orientation, gender identity, race and ethnicity, kind of some of the social determinants of health as well. And then we're looking at those performance patterns as well, which is their habits, their routines, their roles, their rituals. How do they move through their day? How do they use time? And is that supporting them, or is it a deterrence? And then in terms of client factors, values, spirituality, and beliefs. And then we look at a little more on the physical side here, body structures and body functions that are either supporting or inhibiting engagement. And then we're looking at what is important to them, what are their goals around these different areas, not just improving independence, but rather, their ability to engage in occupations or perform those occupations from a preventative perspective, health and wellness, quality of life. Are there roles that they still want to fulfill? Participation, well-being, and then occupational justice, which is basically saying that people have the right to be engaged in meaningful occupations. And are there some issues around that where the person is being excluded because of their condition? So I wanted you to have that kind of broad perspective of what OTs are doing when we do evaluations, when we use the full scope of our practice, and then we can think about how that might align with the 4 M's of age-friendly healthcare. And I think there's a clear alignment with what matters. And when we look at what matters, we may be looking, actually, when we look at all of the 4 M's, we look at them through, I'd say, a slightly different lens than as a medical provider. So when we look at what matters, to some degree, I'm looking at what matters to them about how they experience and receive care and how they participate in their own health management. So I'm looking at those routines and habits, their values and identity, their valued roles, things that they want others to know about them, preferred topics of conversation that bring them comfort or make them feel known. When I look at the mentation aspect, we certainly do evaluate people's cognitive performance. We're looking typically through a strengths-based perspective, what still remains that we can build on, and how can we modify the environment or occupations to make a match between what their cognitive performance is and the activity that they need to engage in. But I'm also looking at their self-perception of cognition. Have they picked up some compensatory strategies that they use, and the impact on daily function. From a mobility perspective, we're certainly looking at assistive device use, history of falls, and very importantly, environmental barriers in the home, and then their daily activity routines, like how do they integrate mobility into their daily routines. Maybe they're not, an exerciser, they don't go to the gym, but in what ways is mobility integrated into their daily life? And then from a medication perspective, very different than what what you would be looking at from a medical perspective. We're looking at how do they obtain the medication, how are the meds stored and organized in their home, how do they organize their schedule, and things as practical as their ability to open containers. So I'll share a quick example with you of something I created for my students to do with older adults who live in the community, kind of from a preventative perspective. So they work over 3 sessions. They do interviews together with older adults who are living in the community to create what we call the My Life profile for age-friendly healthcare. The students interview the older adult, and then at the end of the interviews, they work together with the older adult to say, if you were going to be hospitalized, and this is all framed around kind of prevention of delirium or management of delirium. So ultimately, the student works together with the older adult to create this profile that's then put in their hospital go bag or shared with their primary care provider, in a way that they could be advocating for their own age-friendly healthcare by letting their provider know some of their interests. We always include sensory preferences. Do they have sensory sensitivities, for instance, that would be important for providers to know, and then some kind of self-perception information on cognition and some of that information about medication and mobility. So I have done this every year. This is just from 1 year's data, but I've done it every year with my students, with older adults in our community from a community-based organization called Marin Villages. I had about a little less than half of them complete the survey, but they found completing the template and going through the process relevant to their well-being. Half of them said that they plan to share it with their healthcare provider, and 80% said they would recommend it to another older adult. And there's just a couple of quotes. So they felt like, I think it felt empowering to them to be able to share what was most important to them, for somebody to know, I get cold really easily and all the time, or I need complete dark when I sleep at night, and I wear, an eye mask when I sleep at night. I'm going to put that in my hospital go bag and bring it with me. Or I feel really good when I talk about, growing up in Wisconsin and my time as a child on Fox Lake. If I was feeling fearful, that might be a nice thing for me to reminisce or talk about. So I think I'm out of time. That went so fast. There are my references. And here is a slide for you to complete your evaluation survey. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so